escaped Sapiens.
The neat thing is he was born the same year as his great-great-grandchildren. But yeah, so the technology to clone Kurt was basically very similar to the technology to clone Dolly, and you hit on one of the key things right away is there's a lot of misconceptions about cloning as a technology. Mm-hmm. One is that Dolly was the first clone. Dolly was not the first clone. Dolly is the most famous clone because of the breakthrough that she represented. So the first cloned animals ever produced were actually cloned in 1957. And they were frogs.
Wait, when was Dolly?
1996.
I mean, that's they won by quite a bit.
Yeah. And people were cloning different types of frogs and salamanders and fish in the 60s and 70s. And then in 1981, a team of people successfully cloned mice. And those were the first cloned mammal. And then they cloned sheep and cattle in the late 1980s. So actually the first cloned sheep were cloned in 1986. The thing that made Dolly different was that all of those clones for nearly 40 years had been cloned using embryonic cells, mm-hmm. which embryonic cells, if you know anything about, embryos and stem cells and whatnot, they can become any tissue. They can, they're very plastic. Whereas if I take a cell from an adult sheep mm-hmm. that is a skin cell, that cell is programmed to be skin. It is not programmed to be muscle tissue or fat tissue or brain tissue, right? I mean, so it's like the challenge was how do you get an adult cell to be reprogrammed to an embryonic state? And Dolly was the first organism ever cloned from adult cells. Mm-hmm. And she did die young. However, she did not die because she was a clone. Not a lot of people know that Dolly, she lived to be about 6 years old. She produced offspring. She was fertile. She reproduced. She had babies. Her babies were healthy. She was largely healthy, but she was confined to living indoors, which gave her arthritis, and also what made it, at a greater chance of risk of being exposed to disease if disease came through with certain animals. And that's what happened is that there was an epidemic, just like COVID, going through kind of sheep farm industry and whatnot. And Dolly they weren't able to move her to a safe place before she was exposed. And she got exposed to a virus. The viral infection caused her to grow tumors in her lungs. And so it was that killed her. And what not very many people know.
Damage that's done to your sort of research. I mean,
oh God, it's the social perception of cloning because of the misconceptions of what happened with Dolly, and then other things since, right? So like in 2001, the world's first extinct subspecies was cloned, but it died 7 minutes later. The first endangered species was cloned in 2000.
This was the ibex?
That was the ibex, yeah. The first endangered species, a type of wild cow called a gaur, was cloned in 2000. It died 2 days later. I mean, these because they were dealing with endangered species, these, once again, like Dolly, they got a lot of press. They got a lot of attention. And the gaur died of disease. The ibex did die because of an abnormality, which happens with clones. But the thing that people don't appreciate about those projects is those were not projects to the scale of what people working with sheep or cattle or cats or dogs do. They were working with low funds. They couldn't work with as many animals as they could have. And absolutely, the team that cloned the ibex, if they had had more money and more resources, would have produced healthy babies.
And what's the status there? Has that continued since? That was 2003?
That was 2003, yeah. They renewed some experiments in 2013. Once again, did not have enough resources to really do a large-scale experiment. Didn't get any pregnancies there. And so far, that project has kind of been just shelved because A related species of ibex has actually been introduced into the former range of the extinct subspecies, and they're thriving. They're doing really well. So there really might not be a great need to kind of bring that extinct species back because its relative is doing its job in the environment. But the truth is that in the last 20 years, people have cloned and produced healthy, fertile coyotes, healthy wolves. They've cloned a European mouflon that, once again, sadly died of.
Sorry,
it's a wild type of sheep in Europe,
okay.
And that clone sadly died young as well, but it did survive to adulthood. It got hit by the same disease that killed a lot of sheep in that species. There's been a lot of good successes with cloning, but because of some of these misconceptions and these how people think about how cloning has been done, it's really prevented it from ever really being used in conservation, because a lot of people working in the conservation field, scientists especially, they're not even all aware of how much work has been done in cloning and how it can be used. And so, it's been 24 years since Dolly was cloned, and just now we've finally done genetic rescue cloning for the first time. Mm-hmm. And so Revive and Restore, we're really hoping that we can, kind of work towards a new era where people really start using these technologies and adopting them more in strategic ways. And we've been kind of developing multiple programs to kind of do this. And I think the biggest thing about the misconceptions of Dolly that not a lot of people know is that the same cells that were used to clone Dolly were actually used again several years later, actually more than a decade later, to make more sheep clones. And so Dolly has 4 living identical sisters, and they have all lived to old age.
I see.
But they were raised in a pasture, outdoors. Only one of the 4 clones has developed arthritis like Dolly. And it shows that the arthritis is not from the cloning process. It's not genetic. Otherwise, they all would have got it. Right? I mean, so it's really about environment. And so, not a lot of people know that whole story about what's happened since Dolly.
I certainly was not aware of it.
Escaped Sapiens.